Hello, my friends. Today, we travel back more than 500 years to one of the most famous battles in human history. It is a story of courage, sacrifice, and determination. A story so remarkable that it continues to inspire people around the world even today. Imagine standing before the largest military force your world has ever seen. Thousands upon thousands of soldiers stretch across the horizon. Their banners fill the sky. Their weapons shine beneath the sun. Their empire controls vast lands and countless cities. Most people would see such an army and believe resistance is impossible. Yet in the year 480 BC, a small group of Greek warriors chose to do exactly that. Among them were 300 Spartan soldiers led by their king, Leonidas. They were not the only Greeks present at the battle, but they would become the symbol of one of history's greatest last stands. Facing an enemy that vastly outnumbered them, they marched toward a narrow mountain pass known as Thermopylae. There, they would make a decision that would echo through the centuries. What makes this story extraordinary is not that they expected victory. In fact, many of them understood that they might never return home. They knew the odds were against them. They knew the enemy possessed greater numbers, greater resources, and seemingly unstoppable power. Yet they chose to stand their ground. Why? Why would a king willingly lead his men into what appeared to be certain death? Why would 300 warriors refuse to retreat when survival seemed impossible? And how did a battle that ended in defeat become one of the most celebrated moments in military history? To answer those questions, we must first understand the world in which these men lived. We must understand the empire that threatened Greece and the civilization that produced warriors, unlike any the ancient world had ever seen. Because before there was Thermopylae, before there was Leonidas, and before the 300 Spartans became legends, a powerful ruler was preparing one of the greatest invasions the world had ever witnessed. His name was Xerxes, and he commanded the mightiest empire on earth. Long before the Battle of Thermopylae, a vast empire had risen in the east, stretching across 3 continents. The Persian Empire was unlike anything the ancient world had ever seen. It controlled lands from modern-day Egypt to parts of India, governed millions of people, and commanded enormous wealth. Roads connected distant provinces, armies protected trade routes, and powerful kings ruled over one of history's greatest civilizations. To many people living at that time, Persia seemed unstoppable. At the center of this empire stood a man named Xerxes I. He inherited a kingdom built by his father, Darius the Great, one of the most successful rulers in Persian history. Yet Xerxes was not content simply to maintain what he had inherited. He wanted more. He wanted to expand Persian power even further and finish a mission that his father had begun. Years earlier, Darius had attempted to conquer Greece. However, in 490 BC, his forces suffered a surprising defeat at the Battle of Marathon. The victory shocked the ancient world. A collection of Greek city-states had managed to resist one of the most powerful empires on earth. For the Persians, this defeat was more than a military setback. It was an insult. Xerxes intended to correct that humiliation, determined to bring Greece under Persian control. He began preparing an invasion on a scale few had ever witnessed. Historical accounts describe years of planning and enormous resources devoted to the campaign. Soldiers were gathered from every corner of the empire. Different peoples, speaking different languages and carrying different weapons, joined the massive force. Engineers built bridges. Supplies were stockpiled. Ships assembled along the coast. Ancient historians often reported incredibly large numbers for Xerxes' army Though modern scholars continue to debate the exact size, what is certain is that the invasion force was enormous by the standards of the time. To the Greeks, it must have seemed as though the entire world was marching toward them. As news of the invasion spread across Greece, fear followed. The Greek world was not a single united nation. Instead, it consisted of independent city-states that often argued, competed, and even fought against one another. Athens, Sparta, Corinth, and many others each had their own governments, interests, and ambitions. Unity did not come naturally to them, yet the Persian threat was unlike anything they had faced before. If Greece remained divided, many believed it would be conquered one city at a time. The challenge was clear. The Greeks needed to find a way to resist an empire that possessed greater numbers, greater wealth, and seemingly limitless resources. Among all the Greek city-states, one stood apart from the others. It was not famous for art like Athens. It was not known for trade or philosophy. Instead, it had built its reputation on discipline, sacrifice, and war. That city was Sparta, and the warriors of Sparta were about to face the greatest test in their history. Among the many city-states of ancient Greece, Sparta was unlike any other. While cities such as Athens became famous for philosophy, literature, and democracy, Sparta devoted itself to a different purpose. Its leaders believed that survival depended on military strength. In a dangerous world filled with rivals and enemies, they concluded that only the strongest society could remain free. As a result, nearly every aspect of Spartan life revolved around preparing for war. From an early age, Spartan boys were expected to become soldiers. Their upbringing was designed to build discipline, endurance, and loyalty to the state. Life was intentionally difficult. Comfort was not encouraged. Obedience was expected. Young Spartans learned to endure hunger, cold, fatigue, and hardship. The goal was simple: create warriors capable of facing fear without hesitation. The military training system, known today as the Agoj, became one of the most famous institutions of the ancient world. Boys left their families at a young age and entered a demanding environment where physical strength and mental toughness were constantly tested. They trained together, fought together, and learned to place the needs of Sparta above their own. For the Spartans, courage was not merely admired, it was required. This culture shaped an entire society. Even adult citizens continued military service throughout much of their lives. Spartan men spent years training and preparing for conflict. Their reputation spread far beyond Greece. Friend and enemy alike viewed Spartan soldiers as some of the most disciplined warriors in the ancient world. Yet Sparta's strength did not come only from weapons and training. It came from a powerful belief system. Spartans valued duty, sacrifice, and honor above personal comfort. To them, defending their homeland was among the highest responsibilities a citizen could fulfill. Stories of bravery were celebrated. Cowardice was deeply shameful. These values created a society willing to endure hardships that many others could not. When news arrived that Xerxes and his massive Persian army were approaching Greece, the Spartans immediately understood the seriousness of the threat. This was not simply another border dispute or regional conflict. It was a struggle that could determine the future of Greece itself. But Sparta faced a difficult problem. Religious festivals and traditions limited when the full Spartan army could march to war. While the Persian invasion advanced, political and religious obligations complicated the city's response. Time was running out, and Greece needed leadership. In that moment of uncertainty, one man would make a decision that would define his legacy forever. He was King Leonidas, and he was about to choose a path that would lead directly to Thermopylae. As the Persian invasion moved steadily closer, anxiety spread across Greece. Reports arrived describing the immense size of Xerxes' army and the speed of its advance. Cities began preparing for war. Leaders debated strategies. Ordinary people wondered whether their homes, families, and way of life could survive what was coming. In Sparta, the responsibility of responding to this crisis rested largely upon King Leonidas. Leonidas was not a young man seeking glory. He was an experienced ruler who understood both the strengths and limitations of his city. He knew that Sparta produced some of the finest warriors in Greece. But he also knew that even Spartan courage could not magically overcome overwhelming numbers. The challenge before him was not simply military, it was political, religious, and strategic. At that time, Sparta was observing important religious festivals, and tradition discouraged the immediate deployment of the full Spartan army. To modern observers, this may seem surprising. An enormous invasion was approaching. Yet religious obligations still influenced decision-making. For the Spartans, however, these traditions were deeply important and could not easily be ignored. Meanwhile, the situation in Greece was becoming increasingly urgent. If Xerxes advanced unchecked, many Greek cities could fall before a united defense was organized. Leonidas understood that waiting carried its own dangers. Faced with these circumstances, he made a remarkable decision. Rather than remain in Sparta, Leonidas would lead an advance force northward to confront the Persians. He selected 300 Spartan warriors to accompany him. These men were not chosen randomly. According to historical tradition, they were experienced soldiers, respected among their peers, and prepared for the risks that lay ahead. The number itself has become legendary. But what often gets overlooked is that Leonidas did not march entirely alone. Other Greek forces from various city-states joined the defense together. They hoped to delay the Persian advance long enough for the rest of Greece to prepare. Even so, few could have believed that this small coalition would actually defeat Xerxes' massive army. Their objective was more realistic. They aimed to buy time, slow the invasion, and demonstrate that Greece would not surrender without resistance. As Leonidas and his men marched toward northern Greece, they likely understood the gravity of their mission. Every step carried them closer to an enemy, unlike any they had faced before. Yet there was no sign of hesitation. They continued forward, driven by duty, loyalty, and the belief that some causes were worth any sacrifice. The success of their plan depended on one critical factor. They needed a battlefield where Persian numbers would matter less, a place where a small force could hold back a much larger army, a place known as Thermopylae. And there, one of history's most famous battles would begin. When Leonidas and his men arrived at Thermopylae, they found exactly what they had been searching for. The location was not chosen by accident. It was one of the few places in Greece where a small force might realistically slow a much larger army. Thermopylae, which means hot gates, was a narrow coastal pass situated between steep mountains and the sea. In some areas, the pathway was so restricted that only a limited number of soldiers could fight side by side. For the Greeks, this geography offered hope. The Persians possessed overwhelming numerical superiority. On an open battlefield, their advantage could have been devastating. Thousands of soldiers could attack from multiple directions, surround their enemies, and use their numbers to crush resistance. But Thermopylae changed the situation completely. The narrow pass prevented Xerxes from deploying his full strength at once. Instead of facing the entire Persian army, The Greeks would face only the soldiers who could physically fit into the restricted space. It was a simple idea, but a brilliant one. The Greeks quickly began preparing their defenses. Stone walls that had existed in the area were repaired and strengthened. Soldiers took positions along the narrow route and waited for the Persian advance. Around Leonidas stood not only Spartans, but also warriors from several Greek city-states who had chosen to join the defense. Though history would remember the 300 Spartans above all others, they were part of a larger coalition united by a common goal. Soon, the Persian army arrived. For many Greeks, the sight must have been overwhelming. The invading force stretched across the landscape. Soldiers from different regions of the Persian Empire marched beneath countless banners. Archers, infantry, cavalry, and elite units filled the area. Ancient writers described the army as appearing endless. Whether those descriptions were exaggerated or not, there is little doubt that the Persians greatly outnumbered the defenders. Xerxes himself reportedly expected the Greeks to retreat once they saw the size of his forces. After all, many armies throughout history have surrendered when confronted by impossible odds. Yet something unusual happened. The Greeks stayed, day after day. They remained at their positions. According to later accounts, some Spartans even appeared calm and relaxed while preparing for battle. Stories tell of warriors combing their hair before combat, a traditional Spartan practice that surprised Persian observers. To the invaders, such behavior seemed almost unbelievable. How could men facing certain destruction behave with such confidence? What the Persians were about to discover was that the defenders of Thermopylae were not relying on numbers. They were relying on discipline, training, leadership, and terrain. The stage was now set. One of the most famous confrontations in military history was about to begin, and soon, 300 Spartans would face the mightiest empire on earth. The first attack came sooner than many expected. Xerxes had arrived at Thermopylae confident that the Greek defenders would either flee or surrender. From his perspective, resistance seemed hopeless. He commanded one of the largest armies of the ancient world, while the Greeks represented only a tiny fraction of his strength. Surely, he believed, the battle would be over quickly, but the Greeks refused to move for several days. Xerxes reportedly waited, giving the defenders an opportunity to retreat. When they remained in position, he finally ordered his forces forward. Persian soldiers advanced into the narrow pass, expecting to overwhelm the defenders through sheer numbers. Instead, they encountered something very different. The Greek soldiers fought in a tightly organized formation known as the phalanx, standing shoulder to shoulder, protected by large shields and armed with long spears. They formed a wall of discipline and steel. In the confined space of Thermopylae, this formation became incredibly effective. The Persians could not easily surround them, and only a limited number of attackers could engage at one time. Wave after wave of Persian troops pushed into the pass. Wave after wave was driven back. The Spartans and their allies fought with remarkable coordination. Their training allowed them to move as a single unit. When one soldier grew tired, another stepped forward. Shields overlapped. Spears thrust forward. The narrow battlefield turned the Persian advantage into a burden. Their superior numbers could not be fully used as casualties mounted. Xerxes became increasingly frustrated. The quick victory he had expected failed to materialize. According to ancient accounts, he watched the fighting from a nearby position and witnessed repeated assaults collapse against the Greek line. Determined to break the defense, Xerxes committed some of his finest troops to the battle. Among them were the Immortals, an elite Persian force renowned throughout the empire. Their name alone inspired fear. These soldiers represented the best Persia had to offer, and many believed they would easily crush the defenders. Yet even the immortals struggled. The terrain continued to favor the Greeks. Spartan discipline continued to hold. The defenders used the narrow pass to neutralize the advantages of their enemy. For 2 days, the Greek position remained secure. Against all expectations, a small force had halted the advance of a mighty empire. News of the resistance spread quickly across Greece. People learned that Xerxes' seemingly unstoppable army had been delayed. Time was being bought. Preparations could continue. Hope remained alive, but beneath the surface, danger was growing. The Persians were learning. They were searching for weaknesses. Somewhere beyond the narrow pass lay an opportunity that could change everything. And unfortunately for Leonidas and his men, there was someone willing to reveal that secret. His name was Ephialtes, and his betrayal would alter the course of the battle forever. For 2 days, the defenders at Thermopylae had achieved what many believed was impossible. A relatively small Greek force had held back the advance of the Persian Empire, frustrating Xerxes and proving that discipline and strategy could challenge overwhelming numbers. Yet despite their success, Leonidas and his men faced a problem they could not solve with courage alone. The pass of Thermopylae was not completely isolated. Hidden among the mountains was a narrow path known to local inhabitants. This route bypassed the main defensive position and provided a way around the Greek lines. The Greeks were aware of its existence and had stationed a small force to guard it. However, maintaining security across difficult terrain was never easy, especially when facing an enemy as determined as Xerxes. At some point during the battle, a local man named Ephialtes approached the Persians, motivated by the promise of reward. He revealed the existence of the mountain path and offered to guide Persian troops around the Greek defenses. His decision would become one of the most famous acts of betrayal in ancient history. For Xerxes, the information was invaluable. Under the cover of darkness, a selected Persian force began moving through the mountains. Led by local guidance, they advanced toward the route that would place them behind the Greek position. The defenders guarding the path eventually became aware of the approaching Persians, but by then, the situation had become extremely dangerous. News soon reached Leonidas. The Persian army was no longer confined to the narrow pass in front of him. Soon, enemy soldiers would appear behind the Greek lines as well. The strategic advantage that had protected the defenders for 2 days was disappearing. At that moment, Leonidas faced the most important decision of his life. He understood exactly what the new situation meant. If the Persians attacked from both directions, the defenders could become trapped. Escape would become nearly impossible. The battle was entering its final stage. Different ancient sources describe the events that followed in slightly different ways, but most agree on one essential point. Leonidas recognized that the position could no longer be held indefinitely. Many of the Greek allies were ordered or allowed to withdraw, preserving their forces for future battles. Their survival would help continue the broader struggle against Persia. But Leonidas chose a different path. Rather than retreat, he remained, alongside his 300 Spartans and a small number of other loyal Greek defenders. He prepared to make a final stand. The mission had changed. No longer were they fighting simply to block a road. Now, they were fighting to buy every possible moment for Greece. As dawn approached, the defenders understood what awaited them. The Persians were coming from the front. The Persians were coming from behind, and the last battle of Leonidas was about to begin. The morning of the final battle arrived with a grim certainty. Leonidas and the men who remained at Thermopylae knew exactly what awaited them. There would be no rescue. There would be no reinforcements. The Persian army was approaching from both directions, and the narrow pass that had protected the defenders for 2 days could no longer save them. Yet none of this changed their decision. They stayed. For many soldiers throughout history, courage has meant charging into battle with hopes of victory. For Leonidas and his warriors, courage meant something different. It meant standing firm even when victory was no longer possible. It meant fighting not because they expected to survive, but because they believed their sacrifice served a greater purpose. As the Persians launched their final assault, the defenders fought with extraordinary determination. Ancient accounts describe fierce combat as wave after wave of attackers crashed against the remaining Greeks. The battle became increasingly desperate. Spears shattered. Shields broke. The fighting moved closer and closer. As the defenders were gradually pushed back, somewhere during the struggle, King Leonidas was killed. His death became a turning point in the battle. The Greeks reportedly fought fiercely to recover and protect the body of their fallen king. Even in death, Leonidas remained the symbol of their resistance. Around him, Spartan warriors continued fighting despite overwhelming odds. The numbers were simply too great. Persian forces attacked from multiple directions, gradually surrounding the defenders. Yet the Greeks refused to surrender. They continued resisting for as long as they could, turning every moment into a costly victory of its own. Every minute they delayed, the Persian advance allowed more time for the rest of Greece to prepare. Eventually, the battle came to an end. The defenders who had chosen to remain were killed. Thermopylae had fallen. On the surface, it appeared to be a Persian victory. Xerxes controlled the battlefield. His army continued its advance into Greece. By traditional military standards, the Greeks had lost, but history would remember the battle very differently. The Persians had won the field. Yet the story of Leonidas and his warriors spread throughout Greece. Their stand became a symbol of resistance, courage, and sacrifice. City-states that often disagreed with one another found inspiration in what had happened at Thermopylae. The determination shown by the defenders strengthened Greek resolve during one of the most dangerous moments in their history. The battle was over. The Spartans were gone. Leonidas was dead. Yet somehow, their story was only beginning, because more than 2,500 years later, the world still remembers the 300, and understanding why may be the most important part of this entire story. More than 2,500 years have passed since the Battle of Thermopylae, yet the names Leonidas and the 300 remain known throughout the world. Countless battles have been fought since then. Empires have risen and fallen. Entire civilizations have disappeared. Yet the story of a small group of warriors standing against overwhelming odds continues to capture the human imagination. Why part of the answer lies in the extraordinary contrast at the heart of the story. People naturally remember moments when the weak challenge the powerful, when a small force refuses to surrender to a much larger one, and when individuals choose principle over survival. Thermopylae represents all of these things. It is a story about courage in the face of fear and determination in the face of impossible odds. Yet the reason we remember Thermopylae is not simply because 300 Spartans fought bravely. History is filled with examples of bravery. What makes this story unique is the impact it had on those who came after. Although the Greeks lost the battle itself, the stand at Thermopylae became a powerful symbol of resistance. It showed that the Persian Empire was not invincible. It demonstrated that discipline, leadership, and unity could challenge even the greatest military power of the age. In the months that followed, Greece continued the struggle. The war was far from over. Eventually, Greek forces would achieve important victories at battles such as Salamis and Plataea, helping to turn the tide against Persia. Many historians believe that the sacrifice at Thermopylae played an important role in maintaining Greek morale during this critical period. The defenders had bought time, inspired their allies, and provided a powerful example of commitment to a common cause. Over the centuries, the story continued to grow. Writers recorded it, artists painted it, historians studied it. Generations of leaders, soldiers, and ordinary people found inspiration in the example of Leonidas and his men. The details of the battle have been debated, examined, and retold countless times. But the central message has remained remarkably consistent. Some things are worth defending, some principles are worth sacrifice, and sometimes the significance of an action cannot be measured by victory or defeat alone. Today, when people speak of the 300, they are not usually discussing military tactics or ancient politics. They are talking about courage. They are talking about loyalty. They are talking about the willingness to stand firm when retreat would be easier. That is why the story endures. The Spartans did not survive Thermopylae. They did not win the battle. But they achieved something far more difficult. They became unforgettable. Thank you for joining me on this journey into one of history's most famous battles. If you enjoyed this story, let me know in the comments. And until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and never stop being curious about the remarkable stories hidden within our past.